welcome back to our series of The Scholar and the Warrior. Again, my name is Sam. I'm the head instructor here at Bluegrass Martial Arts. And today I want to talk to you about, again, within this idea of the Scholar and Warrior series here, this is how we take our worldview, that of the Christian worldview. That's the worldview I claim proudly, and that is how we infuse this worldview into the study of martial arts. So last time we talked about the idea of the image of God and how my purpose and calling for teaching martial arts, while some might say, you know, you're teaching people to punch and kick and that's a violent thing, yes, there's some truth to that. There's some violence to it. But ultimately our purpose in learning this form of violence is so that we might stop violence, specifically violence that would destroy or injure the image of God that we bear. So we're learning to protect the image of God that is placed upon all of us here. Protect the sanctity of life. That's what makes life sacred. So along that same idea, I want to look at another passage today that talks about how we bear this image and what that looks like specifically in two ideas, that of both fear and wonder. So this is from Psalms 139. This is one of my favorite passages. We will probably come back to this psalm again because there's a lot of wonderful, deep stuff about the idea of who God is in His person. But right in the middle of this whole thing, as it's talking about God and understanding His character and His idea of being omnipresent and omniscient at the same time, right in the middle of that, there's this section about us, right? About who we are and who we are as beings that bear His image. Starting at verse 13, I'm going to read through to 16. It says this again, Psalm 139, "For you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were written all the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." All right, so fearfully and wonderfully made. I love that. I love that idea. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So talking about this idea of both fear and this idea of wonder here, because these can be two complicated ideas. So beginning with this idea of fear, we find all through Scripture there's a reference of God and who He is, and that if we are going to understand what wisdom is, that begins with the idea of fearing who God is. And a lot of people, of course, will read that and get the wrong idea of what we mean by fear in that instance. There's that sense of fear in that you find yourself in a place where you are afraid because you don't know that you are safe and secure, and that something isn't waiting to get you or someone isn't waiting to hurt you, right? There's that sense of you find yourself in a scary place. So being afraid in that sense is different than fear when God tells us and calls us to fear Him and who He is, right? This idea of fear, at least in a Hebrew connotation, takes on a different form. It's not necessarily that idea of being scared. There's a little bit of that to it too, right? There's this idea that you are standing in the presence of something that is massively bigger than you are, right? Not long ago, I got to go on a cruise where my brother was on staff singing on a boat. He was in a show that they were doing. And on the ship one day, when I had a chance, I went up. They had like a high ropes course. And it was real cool. They had one part of this high ropes course where you could walk right out onto this beam. And you were tethered in to this harness strapped around you. And there was like a pulley system thing that you were just kind of moving along with this pulley system. But you could walk out on this little beam, and you are standing out above the ocean, like way above the ocean. You're on top of this boat, which is way above the surface, and you've walked out on this beam, which takes you out past where the life rafts stick out on the side of the boat. And yeah, if you slipped, you're gone. You're in the ocean, and it's a long fall down. you're not going to fall because you're strapped into this harness and you're safe, right? There's that, but there's still that sense of, I'm going to take each step very carefully and be very mindful of it. This isn't the place to get careless, right? Standing in the presence of God has that kind of awe and wonder. It is something that is so magnificently bigger than you are. A realization that God isn't in any need of you. You can't do anything to add or detract from God's glory at all. He is completely independent and so much bigger than you are. And there is something of wonder, just awe, standing in the presence of that. And that's more of what we're called to fear. A realization that, we're not doing God any favors at any point in our life. Regardless of the decisions you make, good or bad, you can't ever get God in your debt somehow, right? He's always going to be bigger than you. So when it comes down to it, if he has any time to look down from heaven and spare a thought for you, that's out of grace, right? God is huge. So that idea of fearing God isn't being in that sense of someone's going to get me. If I do the wrong thing, God's going to get me, and I'm afraid of him like, someone would be afraid of abusive parent. No, this quite the opposite. This is God who, regardless of being completely independent of anything you could do, still cares about you and is holding you safe. You're standing out on the edge of that ledge over a giant ocean that is awesome and wonderful, but would kill you too if you fell into it. Even if you could swim, at some point you would just drown, right? Your life literally is being held up by that harness, right? And so it's recognizing there's something awesome in all that. And that's where wisdom begins. When we step outside ourselves and say, God doesn't need me. God doesn't need me to perform whatever he wants to do in time and space. I'm lucky to be a part of his story. That's the way it works. That's where wisdom starts, right? And that's this different idea. It's not being scared. It's being having fear is this kind of awesome respect and reverence for that which is bigger than you. Now, the other side to that is this idea of wonder. It says, I am fearfully, yet at the same time wonderfully made. And this idea of wonder, I think, escapes us sometimes, especially as we get older. As we get older, we start to lose that sense of what wonder is. Ravi Zacharias has an illustration of this, where he tells a bedtime story to each of his 3 kids. And each one, of course, is at a different age, so they're at a different stage, right? So if you come in and you tell the story to the 4-year-old, and it's a bedtime story, and you're telling the story where this Billy gets up, and it's late at night, he gets out of bed, he hears something at the door, and he goes to the door, he opens the door, and there standing on the other side of the door is a dragon. Well, the 4-year-old, when they hear dragon, all of a sudden now they're captivated, right? Their wonder, their imagination has been captured now, and you've brought them into the story, right? But if you tell the same story to the 3-year-old, right, and Billy hears a sound and he gets up late at night and he goes to the door and he opens the door, the 3-year-old's probably already trapped into the wonder of the story, because just that he would be brave enough to get up in the middle of the night and walk to the door himself. Wow, this kid's amazing, right? They're already sucked in. They don't need the dragon to already have the full wonder of the story kind of spill over into their imagination. Now, the 2-year-old, and I love the way Ravi says this, the 2-year-old whose whole worldview is summed up in one word, cookie, all you have to do then is say, Billy hears a sound, and he woke up, and he stood up out of bed, and now the 2-year-old's already. You don't have to get to the door. You don't have to get to the dragon. The 2-year-old's already sucked into the wonder of the story. As we get older, we lose our sense of wonder, right? And we have to capture that. When Jesus talks to several groups of adults, because their children have rushed in, and the disciples are like, no, you kids aren't important enough, right? Let the adults come in. And Jesus says, no, don't stop them. Let the kids come in. Right, and let them see me. And he sits down with the children, and he's talking, he's teaching with the children. He uses them as an example, talks about how unless you become like a child, you can't understand the kingdom of heaven. All right, you can't participate in the kingdom of heaven. And what does he mean by all that? Well, he's talking about this idea of wonder, right? The child doesn't need as much to be captivated in their imagination, to be brought into the wonder of the story that God is telling in all our lives. We get lost in that, especially as we get older. But God has a story for each one of us. He has a plan for each one of us to be a part of his story, the story he is telling in time and space right now. And we're a part of that, but we lose sense of that wonder as we go through life, and we get wrapped up in what our plans for our lives are. So getting back to this idea of being both fearfully, awesomely, respectfully, and at the same time full of wonder, that God has used both these ideas, two competing ideas, but somehow they find a coalescence here in us as he places his image upon us and puts his mark on each one of our lives as we bear his image, to hopefully recognize the fearful and wonderful way we are made, and to then step into the story that he's telling in time and space, in reality, that we find our place in that story also, that we become part of his story. Again, I'm Sam. Thank you for your time.